Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for Lindamood-Bell's Leaders in Literacy series. Today we'll be discussing implementing district-wide K-2 reading initiatives, and I'm going to be joined by two of my colleagues, one who works with Lindamood-Bell and one who works in Fort Smith Public Schools, which is the school district that we're going to be talking about today. My name is Dave Kivita. I am the Director of Development for Lindamood-Bell for Schools. And Lindamood-Bell for Schools is the division of Lindamood-Bell that goes out and partners with schools to provide professional development in our programs. So the main person that we're going to be talking with today and our guest of honor today is Tracy Newhart from Fort Smith. And so I'm going to send it over to you, Tracy, to just say hi to folks and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Tracy Newhart. I'm the K-12 Literacy Coordinator for Fort Smith Public Schools.
Awesome. And the other person that we're going to have is our project director in Fort Smith. He spends all of his time every day of the week. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Kloss, and I'm the Lindamood-Bell project director for Fort Smith Comprehensive Partnership.
Awesome. And we've worked with Fort Smith Public Schools for a couple of years. And so there's a quick view of what the demographics of the district looks like. Obviously, Fort Smith Public Schools is in the state of Arkansas, and it's a district of about 14,000 students that do have a lot of different variances. They have a large English language learner population in Fort Smith and a very diverse population of students. And Tracy, I know that you grew up right in the area of Fort Smith. So you're obviously well-versed in the whole region, but maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of when you started in Fort Smith and what your evolution was as an educator there.
Thank you. Yes, I started my career about 22 years ago. I've been in the Fort Smith Public District in a variety of schools and climates when demonstrating the thought process of where I wanted to go with my career. So I started out in one of the elementary schools as a kindergarten teacher, and then I transferred into a state initiative where they had a focus of literacy block and the components of that. So I was in an instructional facilitator role for about 9 years in one of the 19 elementary schools. I then transferred into a district position servicing 4 of the elementary schools. After that, I went into my current job of being a district literacy coordinator. From 2009 till up to this year, I was just elementary. Our district transferred into having one coordinator to streamline all of our 26 schools. So now I am the K-2 district coordinator. So in my experience with the district, I've been able to see our layout, our flow of how the district has encompassed the learning and student achievement. So we have directors, we have supervisors, we have administrators that put forth effort to make student achievement successful in our school district.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, and responsible for K through 12 is quite a big role. You have a lot of responsibility there, Tracy. Mm-hmm. So one of the big initiatives taking place in Arkansas that's impacted, obviously, your job, Tracy, has been the RISE initiative pushed out by the Arkansas Department of Education, which has to do with making sure that all students are given the appropriate instruction to learn how to read. And then for those students who are showing real difficulties in learning how to read, that they're provided the proper intervention. And it is a huge initiative. It's statewide. And so, Tracy, maybe you can talk a little bit more about what RISE is and how it impacts you and how it impacts what it is that teachers are doing in the classroom.
Yes, thank you. One of the things from our state is they wanted to have a push out, a rollout of ways for teachers to understand the science of reading, the newest research that allocates what we need to be doing for word recognition as well as language domain. How do we help kids succeed in knowing how to decode words as well as how to be able to comprehend after they've had that decoding as automaticity, then they can go into understanding what they're reading. So RISE is called Reading Initiative for Student Excellence. The past 3 years, we have given teachers in our district the opportunity to go through 6 days of intense training of learning how do we apply what they call the science of the simple view of reading, the science of reading. And then looking at also the reading row, looking at the components that need to be in our lesson design. How do we tackle decoding and encoding skills with students? How do we keep kids from just knowing how to apply decoding skill to be an automatic? And then that's for as well as the language comprehension. How can we get kids to be able to comprehend not only what they're listening to someone else read, but also when they're reading independently? That's been our push in our district, is really knowing those 2 domains, word recognition and language comprehension. And through looking at Lindamood-Bell, seeing stars, and also us implementing visualizing and verbalizing has helped us to correlate and to implement with fidelity what kids need in the classroom.
Nice. That's great. Thank you, Tracy, for walking us through that background. That's perfect. And in terms of what you were just talking about with seeing stars and visualizing and verbalizing, when the district looked to try to bring in a program to train their K-2 teachers in several years ago, and then train their interventionists and their special education teachers in, they did turn to Lindamood-Bell and utilizing the Seeing Stars program for students who were struggling with decoding, and the Visualizing and Verbalizing program for students to address language comprehension. And it was interesting that the district was very proactive in saying, rather than just think about this in terms of intervention, which is kind of how they were first thinking about it, let's go ahead and ensure all of our K-2 kids are getting access to these different cognitive functions that are being developed. So symbol imagery and phonemic awareness for seeing stars, concept imagery for visualizing and verbalizing. And that the program really allowed for a lot of differentiation based on students' needs, and that was really important to the foundation of the district's choice. And once we started partnering together with Fort Smith, obviously we did our initial workshops. And every organization, obviously, when they're doing professional development, has initial workshops. We think about those as kind of what we call level 1 workshops now. And then we worked together initially in a pilot, and then moving into a more structured system to provide ongoing professional development. And Alex, you being the project director in Fort Smith, are obviously the person that's really in charge of seeing how that job embedded professional development is realized over the course of the year. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what happens in terms of the coaching that Lindamood-Bell provides to the teachers.
Yeah, definitely, Dave. So Lindamood-Bell does provide that job-embedded professional development for their comprehensive partnerships and job-embedded partnerships. With Fort Smith, when teachers go through that level 1 workshop, we provide them with modeling of our lessons during those initial times where they're implementing instruction with their students. So when they get in with their small group or their classroom, Lindamood-Bell coach like myself will get in there with them over Zoom, and we'll be able to show them those program steps and how to implement them effectively with their groups or classrooms. As teachers become more comfortable with the process and they start to observe us implement the steps, they get more practice doing it on days that they do not have coaching. We start to eventually work with teachers where they take more of that the co-teaching approach, where they're going to do more of the instruction and we do a little bit of more of the observation, or jump in if they need specific help with things like air handling or pacing their students. As they become more and more confident, they begin to take the lead in those instructional sessions, and then we provide some feedback after observing them instruct their students and give them things that they can work on to make sure that they're implementing those steps with fidelity.
Nice. And there is, that coaching aspect of the continued learning. And then there's also the continued learning in which teachers are beginning to learn how to write their own lesson plans based on how their students are performing. And we're helping them do instructional planning over the course of the year. We design professional learning community meetings around basic areas that teachers are struggling. And we saw a lot of success doing that over the last couple of years in K-2 classrooms. So when we first started partnering with Fort Smith, when they looked at their iStation Universal Screener, they noticed in September 2017 that almost as many students were scoring in the highest performing tier on the iStation as were performing on the lowest tier. So 1,283 in the highest to 999 in the lowest. And that over time, by using Seeing Stars and visualizing and verbalizing consistently each day in the classroom, they started to see a lot more students starting to perform in that highest tier and many, many fewer in the lowest tier, which obviously makes a big impact structurally for the district in terms of what they have to do resource-wise, in terms of how many small groups do they have running because they have all of these kids struggling. And so it was a really big deal to open up that large performance gap for all of their K-2 students, because of course that impacts special ed and everything else that happens after that, right? So when Fort Smith thought a little bit about that sustainability, wanted to really move, as Alex was describing, from needing all of that constant coaching and modeling and feedback to now beginning to take a little bit more ownership of what it was that they were doing. And Tracy, I know that there are some basic teacher expectations that are set up in RISE in terms of what they're going to be doing. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. So when we go through the 6 days of training, one day is really devoted for our K-2 teachers for looking at phonics and thinking about what does an explicit instruction with students look like for the decoding piece as well as the encoding piece. So we knew as a district we needed to dive a little bit closer to make sure all of those key points and components were there in our current lessons. And so that's where Lindamood-Bell came into play. Alex was really the force that helped us learn how to implement the pieces we needed to with our current Lindamood-Bell lesson design.
Nice. And then, Alex, there were some building expectations that went along with that, right? I know the role of principals has obviously been huge in being able to sustain implementation.
Definitely. So it's been important for us to form those relationships with principals. And one thing that I've been doing with Fort Smith is we have these monthly principal meetings where we can discuss things that we've been seeing in these coaching appointments at schools and things that we want to focus on during our coaching sessions. We also have provided principals with the opportunity to do what we call virtual walkthroughs. During these virtual walkthroughs, principals Zoom in with myself or another Lindamood-Bell coach, and they're able to observe a coaching appointment and then ask any questions they might have about, why we're presenting material this way to students or why we do something this way. So they can get a better understanding of the Lindamood-Bell program. So when they go in and do their own observations, they know what to look for that successful instruction that they want to see.
So when we think about sustainability, as Alex and Tracy were just sharing, there were obviously a layer of teacher expectations that they would become more independent and be able to sustain their own implementation of the programs. Principals were having virtual walkthroughs, so there were basic building expectations. And then the district had to, of course, ask itself, well, how do we support K-12 literacy with all of these expectations that are built? And Tracy, that's where you really came up with the fantastic idea of building out a website that would have all of these different resources that teachers could access in order to help them feel supported as they went through and implemented. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what some of the things that teachers find on that literacy resource page.
Absolutely. So when we started 3 years ago with exploring RISE and all the newest research on the science of reading, we knew we needed to have a place that encompassed everything that a teacher would need to start thinking about what her lesson design looked like, or whether or not a lesson needed to be more focused on the phonics piece, which is the word recognition, or also the language comprehension domain that really focuses on that listening and that text comprehension. So for us as a district, we needed to be able to have teachers utilize the different components that we learned in RISE and have like a one place that teachers could view all the resources. So on this literacy Google site is our current curriculum maps, all the resources that are aligned to RISE, as well as our state standards and any resources from our state. other aspects of it is the scope and sequence that Alex helped our district develop when it came to looking at K-2 phonics. We knew we needed to come up with a vertical progression of the skills that K-2 has in their state standards. And so having a scope and sequence where all K-2 teachers could utilize. We were also able to develop in that scope and sequence a 2-week intervals. So this allowed teachers to be able to work with their instructional facilitator at their school, their grade level teams, as well as their Lindamood-Bell coach on, do we move forward in our scope and sequence, or do we need to reteach something? Because what we've learned with the science of reading is we want kids to go from accuracy then all the way to automaticity. So we want to make sure that we get that kind of streamlined in our lessons. So to have teachers be mindful and thankful, the scope and sequence with the 2-week interval allowed for teachers to differentiate. Within that scope and sequence, Alex helped us develop lesson plans. So if a teacher goes to a week and looks at the decoding or encoding skill, there are lessons that are modeled from what we learned in RISE, what needs to be indicated on a decoding lesson, as well as an encoding lesson. Those lesson plans are designed to help teachers understand the explicit instruction that needs to occur, their explicit language, and also how can they differentiate. Also in the lesson plans, it helps teachers understand where those multisensory techniques come into play as well. So though all of that is encompassed on our Google site, where administrators, support staff, special ed, classroom teachers, everyone has a place that they can go see our latest documents, as well as everything that aligns with our current research with the science of reading.
That's fantastic. And Alex, maybe you can talk a little bit, and Tracy, that was so great. I imagine the stress relief that has for teachers, that they can go someplace and see a scope and sequence that their district has designed for them and lesson plans around that. Alex, maybe you can talk a little bit about how the differentiation then occurs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, Dave. So it would be nice if we had a school district that had schools that were all at the same instructional level, but we know that that's not always the case. Based on, some schools are in more impoverished areas or more wealthier areas. Students coming into kindergarten are not always at the same level at one school from the other. So working with Tracy and working with the teachers and instructional leaders at those school sites, we use those coaching appointments to help teachers find that instructional level for their students. For example, if some students come in and they're really struggling to identify any letters or sounds, we work with those teachers with those coaching appointments to develop strategies to help them picture and develop that sound symbol relationship and knowledge. At other schools, we have a majority of kindergartners who come in and they're already able to decode words, right? And if they're able to decode words and they know there's letters and sounds, it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of their instructional time going back to knowing, one letter a day or one letter a week and working on sounds and symbols that way. Also, based on these coaching appointments, we work with building principals and we develop specific topics for collaborative discussions at the school sites. So based on whatever instructional concerns we're observing, we come up with these presentations where we work with instructional leaders, and then we meet with teachers so we can develop these strategies to, again, help our students learn to their potential.
Fantastic. And as Alex and Tracy have talked about sort of the arc of professional learning that their teachers are going through, that leads into really what Lindamood-Bell's professional development model is. At Lindamood-Bell, we do think about kind of how teachers' learning needs to exist across a spectrum, right, and across a range. That there's sort of this arc of learning, and teachers don't just learn everything that they need by taking an initial workshop, that as Alex and Tracy have described, it really is about a process. And that initially that process might move into some level 2 kind of, or level 3 sort of coaching in the classroom that's taking place, while teachers are also taking some specific online coursework that we've outlined that goes beyond the initial workshops, helps teachers develop next step things like how to handle errors, how to pace students through a program, how to adjust your program based on what you're seeing students do. all the way up to looking at how do we address some of the structures across a district so that we can help that district to implement a program long-term that they'll be able to sustain. And achieving that level 4 process has really been a goal of Fort Smith's. And it's really great to see how many teachers have kind of actually progressed through these different levels and that we're able to track their progression through those levels so that Fort Smith can ensure that they're implementing the programs with fidelity and that they can begin to peel back how much Lindamood-Bell staff needs to be integrated into the district, and they can begin to take more ownership and drive more sustainability of their own implementation. So Alex and Tracy, I wanted to say thank you guys very much for joining us today to talk about the project in Fort Smith. I know you all spend a lot of time and are talking to each other pretty much every single day. So I appreciate you joining and talking a little bit about some of the things that you all have been working on this year.
Thank you.
Definitely.
All right. Again, thank you all for joining Lindamood-Bell for our Leaders in Literacy webinar. This is a series, so we have webinars that will be upcoming this year, talking in particular about extended school year and how we can help students who may have been impacted by the COVID slide to begin to catch up. That'll be one of our topics. And we have a whole library of previous Leaders in Literacy webinars that you can access via our website at lindamoodbell.com. So thank you all very much for joining us. We look forward to working with you in the future. My contact information and Tracy's contact information are there on the slide. And we'd certainly love to interact with all of you and answer your questions. So feel free to reach out.